Today, we're going to be talking about your solution to setting up compliant global payroll. And as I've already spoken to Jennifer, got Jennifer Maguire, who's the strategic, it's easy for me to say, partnership director at Globalization Partners. So would you like to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Mel, and thank you for having us. Really excited to talk to everyone about what an employer of record is and how we can support businesses globally. So myself, as Mel mentioned, I'm Director of Strategic Partnerships across the UK and Ireland for Globalization Partners. I've spent sort of the bulk of my career in HCM and talent space. And I guess my role now at GP for the past 2 years has been looking after our referral partners and helping our clients to access the solutions they need as and when they need certain support with things like HR, payroll, talent, and anything related to employer compliance. So I really love working for Globalization Partners. I love the fact that the relationships we build can further help our clients to flourish and grow. And as I say, yeah, excited to talk to you about this topic today. So Mel, do you want to go into any housekeeping or anything before I jump in?
Thank you, Jennifer. So as always, the webinar will be recorded and the slides will be available to you. You will receive an email within the sort of next 24 hours, just with a link. So if you do miss any of today's webinar, you will have the opportunity to watch it again. Thanks, Jennifer.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, so maybe just a quick starter for 10, give you a bit of background on Globalization Partners and how we kind of came to be. So it all started about 11 years ago or so, where our founder, naturally, Nicole Sahin, she had worked in a company where she was responsible for helping clients to enter new markets. So she would help them with the original entity setup, registering with the tax authorities, setting up the bank account, all that sort of stuff. And over 100 entities later, she realized that it can take a really long time, it can drain resources, it can be really costly. And for some clients, they were only wanting to hire 1 or 2 people in a new location. So realized that there was a much more scalable way of doing it, where you could effectively set up one entity in each location and then simply lease the entity out to clients as and when they wanted to employ people in those jurisdictions. So really that's how GP was born. You'll hear me say GP, I mean Globalization Partners, just less of a mouthful, and probably save us some time. And that's really how we came to be. So 11 years later now, we cover 187 countries. We're the leading global employment platform, helping our clients to hire anyone, anywhere they like, without the need for them to set up an international branch office or subsidiary. And so it means clients can grow really quickly and easily. They can globe too if they want. And that's spanning the globe. So in 2020 as well, we were actually named the #1 industry leader by Nelson Hall. And we're looking forward to seeing more of these analyst reports come out this year, just to understand more about the industry, because I think it's really in its nascence. And, you know, actually considering that, I know, Mel, you've got a bit of a poll to sort of check the status of the awareness, I guess, of EOR.
So one of the things that when we discussed this webinar, wasn't it, Jennifer, was just saying how many people understand what an employer of record is, because there's PEO and there's all these new names for this service. So we thought, actually, before we start, let's find out who knows what about an employer of record. So the question is, do you know what an employer of record is? So could you please answer that? I always have this magic number I'd like to get to. So it's the only poll today, and it's a nice, easy one. So Jennifer, what do you think we're going to have as the answer on this? So we've got yes, no, unsure, a little knowledge.
It's a hard one because we're speaking to payroll people mostly. I think it won't be the most representative sample because, you know, it's not across other industries, but I think we'll get a combination of yes. I'd say a little knowledge would be the most popular one. What do you think?
Well, I can see the results.
Oh, that's a good point. I was actually trying to vote and it said host and panelists cannot vote. So,
oh, sorry, so I could just lie. But to be honest with you, before we answered this, I thought it would be no and a little knowledge. So from what I'm seeing, I'm a little bit surprised. So should we end it? Okay. Thank you so much for everyone that has answered. So let's end the poll. I'll give you 5 seconds if you just want to quickly jump on. This is the best poll we've actually ever had on a webinar with the amount of people answered, so thank you so much. Right, I'm just going to end this now, and then I'm going to share the results. Can you see the results?
Oh yeah.
So I thought it'd be higher on the no, if I'm being honest with you, but then I suppose unsure and a little knowledge, then there's still a lot more information needed for people to understand it more. What do you think, Jennifer?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think for the 13 people that said no, you're in for a treat. And for the remainder, hopefully we can just add a bit more detail and background in terms of how we help our clients, and hopefully how we can help your clients too.
Fab. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing now, and we can move on to the rest of today's webinar.
Fabulous, thank you. Well, it was good to get a baseline just in terms of the awareness in the room. It means I don't have to sort of teach you to suck eggs. So yeah, Mel, I'll hand over to you for the first question.
Thank you. So the first question is, so obviously, we've had those mixed results. So what is an employer of record?
Yeah, so I think for our clients and the partners we work with, it's very, very simple. We basically enable clients to hire anyone, anywhere, quickly and compliantly without the need for them to set up a local entity in the location where the worker is. So as the leading provider here, we mitigate risk and manage all compliance matters for our clients in the locations where we're hiring on their behalf. So we're looking after the employment contracts, the taxes, the statutory benefits, and all of the payroll for those employees without the need for that client to establish any sort of infrastructure in that location. I mentioned the coverage we have. It's 187 countries, so it's not everywhere in the world, but it is pretty much anywhere where you're going to want to hire someone, and so it's great to be able to support our clients wherever they may be.
So what would be the benefits then to people to use an employer of record?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think I probably could spend too long on this question, so I'll try and keep it nice and concise. I think the first thing is accelerating the time to revenue for clients by simplifying and automating a lot of that initial legwork with entity setup, access to payroll, setting up a bank account. I know in certain countries, things like AML and the bank account registration can really hold a company back. So I think that time to revenue, speeding the clients up in that sense, is a great benefit of using an EOR. I also think the consolidation piece, clients use us to ensure compliance wherever the employees are. And if they did go another route, they might have to speak to a local lawyer to get the employment contract. They might have to speak to an accountant to understand how to set up the entity and structure their tax correctly. They might have to speak to a local payroll bureau. Whereas with an employer of record, especially if it's only a handful of employees, it is really the best solution because it provides that ability to get all of those things from one vendor, and we're 100% responsible for looking after all of that for the client. I think one of the most common benefits would be the ability to test out new markets, and I think that's really how Nicole founded the business. Most of the companies were in the US and wanting to branch out into Canada or branch out into Europe and test out new markets, and that ability to easily hire people in these new locations, and not just to set up, but also to come out of a market if you change your mind. Just for example, we had one client who set up in Germany, and after a couple of years realized that it wasn't really worth their while having their entity. So they decided to unwind it, and they wanted to keep the people, but they didn't want to retain the GmbH that they'd set up. And it took them over 6 years to actually deregister their German entity. So if you can imagine the amount of resource and time that the teams would have had to spend on that, whereas if they had used an employer of record, it makes it so much more easy and for your clients to be more agile when they're entering or in fact exiting any of these new markets. There's also some benefits around talent, and this is kind of like the topic of the year. People are really struggling to find the people they need, and so you can open up the talent pool now by looking anywhere in the world. There's nothing to stop you. Obviously, if you can work remotely, you're not going to ask someone to take a flight to come and work in a restaurant. But if you can work remotely, there's nothing to stop you now employing people in any location. And I think one of the best benefits of that is the diversity angle. One of our clients is a very small tech startup in London, and it's very heavily male software engineers, and they're really struggling to find female developers who wanted to join the business because of that sort of, lack of gender balance. And it was really serendipitous. I had a partner at the time, Morgan McKinley, they're a recruiting partner of ours in Ireland. They were talking about how there's a lot of software engineering talent in Turkey and a lot of female software engineers. So we were able to connect them with the client, help them find the female engineers, and then use our employer of record to actually employ them in Turkey in a compliant way. So there's so many benefits. I think they're just some of the key ones to highlight.
Because of the talent shortage of talent, it seems to be just an area that can really help. And we have had a question, so if anybody does have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box, and we will get back to you towards the end of the webinar. The question that's been added so far, just to let you know, I think Jennifer might be covering that during today's webinar, but if not, we will definitely come back to you on that. So one of the key things that we have within the GPA is, and within the payroll industry, it's obviously about compliance, isn't it? Compliance is such a hot topic. So what are the key areas of payroll compliance that company must consider when it comes to paying international employees? Because this is such a key question, especially if you've got international employees for the first time, or you continuously pay international employees. There's always new things coming up, isn't there, Jennifer?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, totally. And you're totally right. Compliance is at the heart of the payroll industry and what you all do. And so as such, I think payroll requires dedicated staff, established processes, and clear expectations from both the employer and employees. And of course, that gets more complicated as you enter new markets. So it goes without saying, I think that each country has its own tax laws, but also may have additional legal requirements for compensation, benefits, pensions, pretty much all of the above. So the key thing I think to point out here would be around what we call the employer burden or social charges. So this is a combination of payroll taxes and the benefits in a certain country. And this is what's mandated by the government for an employer to pay when they employ people in that country. So it varies dramatically depending on where you are. For example, in places like Paraguay and Dominican Republic, I've got a few examples here, it's between 60 and 67%. And then in places like France, it can be 57%. In some countries, it can be zero. There's no employer burden as such. These are all estimates, just because as well, it depends on the role, the age, the salary of the individual. There's so many different factors when it comes to employer burden. And I think that's a key thing for employers to be aware of when you're potentially employing new people in these locations. If you do get it wrong, you could put the business in jeopardy. But the good thing about working for an EOR is that you can basically leave all of that up to the employer of record, because really it is our responsibility to understand the employer burden and to manage that through the payroll function that we offer to our clients. I think another thing just to mention there is, if you were going to potentially offer a role to somebody in a new country, just have an awareness of the social charges that country imposes, because you could, you might be offering somebody a certain salary, but then if you think you're adding 60% on top, if it's somewhere like maybe France or some of those countries I mentioned, you may be outside your budget. So just be careful as well. Maybe if you are going to offer someone a role, to ensure you've done your homework around the social charges in that country. There's a few other things, of course, to be aware of in terms of international payroll, things like minimum wage requirements, overtime and work hours laws. Of course, with the remote working and the pandemic, a lot of countries brought in things like the right to disconnect. So just being aware of things like that. Pay frequency varies country to country, and it might be that in some locations it's statutorily you have to pay on a certain frequency, and I think benefits is a key thing to call out here in terms of compliance as well. As I mentioned, you have statutory benefits that you need to provide as an employer in certain locations, and some countries are more employee friendly than others. So just ensuring that you're offering the correct potentially unemployment, retirement, or disability benefits that are offered in the country that you're employing in. And I think you can use benefits as a bit of a differentiator, especially if the talent competition is really high, which we know it is pretty much everywhere. You can use benefits as a bit of a differentiator.
So So one of the key things that we talk about within the GPA is when should you not use an employer of record, and also are there any restrictions at all in any countries, or any advice on that at all?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because there's some things maybe that you might not expect or might not occur to you that would be good reason not to use an EOR. So very happy to sort of just point those out very quickly. So as an employer of record, it's really difficult for us to take on employees that could be at risk or in danger at work. So if you think about people working on an oil rig or on a construction site, these aren't really a great fit for employer of record, because if something happened to them in the workplace, the legal employer is liable, and really that opens us up to a lot of risk. So you will find the appetite for an employer of record to employ people in roles like that is low. Another category of worker that isn't best placed for EOR is also licensed professionals, so like a doctor or a lawyer, for example, and for similar reasons. It's also tricky to employ a director, if they have signatory rights. So of course we wouldn't be able to offer them that same authority because they're under the GP entity, and so we wouldn't be able to put that person on GP's board or allow them to sign legal documents that relate to GP's legal entity. So that's just something to think about as well if you are going to hire somebody of a significant seniority. And then lastly, you mentioned restrictions, Mel. I think there's a bit of maybe a misconception that there's only a certain amount of time that you can use an EOR for. Certainly that can be the case in certain countries, but in some cases our clients use us in perpetuity. Some clients decide to set up an entity after a few months or after a few years, and maybe just a couple of countries to point out where there are restrictions in terms of that timeline. So for example, Germany, you can only use the EOR for 18 months, and that's where we have an AUG license. So after that 18 months, you would have to decide then to either set up your own entity or come up with another employment solution for that worker. And then in France, it's 36 months as we're set up as a portage, which means we couldn't hire for any more than 36 months.
Thanks, Jennifer. So one of the topics that is always talked about in payroll, and there was just a story I think at the end of last week that was in the national papers about payroll fraud. So what types of payroll fraud and non-compliance can occur when managing an international workforce?
Yeah, so again, lots of payroll people on today's session, I'm sure. So I'm sure you are aware of a lot of the different things that can happen. Some of the key ones would be around ghost employees. So, where someone receives a pay slip from the company, but actually doesn't work there. So the employees don't exist and never worked for the business. Another example is timesheet fraud, where an employee might adjust the amount of time they report working upwards to get more money. Often the difference is very small, so you might not notice it. And I think maybe more substantially or more significantly, misclassification of workers is probably the biggest threat here. And that would be actually where this type of payroll fraud is committed by the employer as opposed to the employee, where employees who are workers and should be employed as such because of the different sort of reasons that they would fall into an employment status. Basically, some employers hire people as contractors instead to avoid having to pay payroll taxes or benefits. So they should be treated as employees and not as independent contractors. But these definitions differ, again, country to country. So it's really important to be aware as well of what those requirements to meet the definition are in that country so that you can correctly classify your workers.
So how does Globalization Partners employer of record keep payroll compliant when a company has employees in multiple countries? This is such a huge job, isn't it, really? So how does GP do this?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think especially, for a HR or a payroll department internally for an individual company, the burden to monitor all of these things I've spoken about, the legal environment, the banking practices, the cultural expectations, especially across multiple countries, it's huge. Whereas for us, this really is, we're paying careful attention to the trends and the changes in international markets, because it's simply a core part of our business. It's our bread and butter. So we're automatically checking every state or country in terms of their requirements for things like minimum wage, overtime, working hour laws, annual leave, pay frequency. All of these things are managed by us, and that's because we have the global entities set up in country with local HR and legal experts to really support and bolster what we do. So as the legal employer, we're handling everything from the payroll, the benefits, the taxes, and all with a payroll accuracy of 99.8%. So I think that's really, I guess, just important for people to understand, is that we're ultimately responsible because we are the legal employer. So we have to look after these things on behalf of our clients, otherwise we'd be in trouble. And also I'd say that just their risk is managed as well. The platform itself is 100% responsible for the international administration and compliance and data protection. So it means that our clients can focus on the day-to-day management of those employees and focus on their core business.
So you're almost like taking the burden away from companies because you're dealing with that side.
Exactly. And I think, it's not just they don't have to do it, but they don't even have to have the awareness of those different laws in those countries, because we take on the responsibility of that.
So you're sort of like taking away the GPA's job in some ways.
Sorry.
What kind of national regulatory changes does a payroll team have to be vigilant for? And obviously there's implications, isn't there, for failing to maintain compliance, obviously, as we've just said in the previous slide about how important compliance is. So what do they need to be aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, employment laws and employee rights are different in every country. Some countries are more employee friendly than others. To quote some of my customers, they might say, oh, it's really hard to fire someone in France or certain locations across Europe. And it's very different in the US, so these different hiring practices, you really need to be aware of what is or isn't permissible as an employer. I think it's not only the changes per country, but also keeping up with the changes over time within a country. Just for example, in relation to tax, in Italy, just to name a few examples here, in each city and town, they decide what percentage the tax should be. And it's the company's responsibility to understand and abide by that. Another example is the Japanese inhabitants tax, which is part of the standard legal deductions in your payroll taxes. And another one would be in Canada, where as an employer, you must make contributions to the Canada pension plan. So I think tax is a really high on that list in terms of the maintaining compliance. Of course, data protection is a big one as well in payroll. Of course, we have the GDPR in Europe, and every country or region has their own version of GDPR. So just to name a few, again, Brazil, you have LGPD, and Singapore, you have PDPA. So some of these are in different languages, so I'm not going to spell out what the acronyms are for. But it's important again to be aware of what the different data protection laws are in those different countries. I think again, just to reiterate that the worker classification piece is vital to get right. Again, as I said, the legal definitions of what a contractor is and what an employee is different in every single location. Just again, to give an example, in Brazil, the contractors are to work on a project basis only. So if they have any sort of indefinite relationship with the employer, they're presumed to be an employee. So in some places like Brazil, it's very black and white, but in others, there could be a number of factors that you have to consider. And the last piece here, I think, would be around relocation. Employee relocation is a big hot topic over the last few years. We saw Airbnb say work from anywhere, and a number of companies are doing that. And I just think you need to be super careful if that is the route you're going to go and you're not going to use an employer of record. You just need to understand the tax implications. People talk about 183 days. It's not as simple as that. It depends on the tax treaties between countries. And if employers, aren't taking care of that, again, they could be opening themselves up to all sorts of payroll tax, sort of backdating those payments.
And before, one of the things that we've had on our helpline is that we've actually had people contact us saying, I've just been told we're employing somebody in China, can I use my Sage payroll system in the UK to process them on? Because basically, they're not aware. So if people, obviously that's a different situation, payroll's being told, we're employing people now, but if people, if companies are looking to the future and looking at countries to employ people, can they contact you and just discuss what countries may be easier to use your services in rather than some of the harder ones? Are you happy to sort of discuss that with?
That's a great question, and certainly part of what we can discuss in that initial process. And it could be, some clients come to us and say, okay, what would it look like if I was to do it in sort of these 5 countries? And we can create sort of a bit of a picture in terms of what that would look like. And like, as you say, helping them to inform that decision maybe before they commit to any or one of these markets.
Yeah, okay. So you can do the both. You can do the planning side, and then you can do that, oh my God, I've got to pay somebody in a certain country in so many days. Okay.
Yeah, and it's funny when that happens, like people are like, oh yeah, we made an offer, they've been working for us for 2 months, but they're not on the correct country payroll. And
it always falls to like payroll and HR, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, we've got to sort this out. So okay, so obviously employer of record, or for those of you that don't know about employer of record, you deal with not just payroll. So what other administrative duties can be offloaded to an employer of record?
Yeah, it's great. A great question, and maybe just in the initial part of it, thinking about the things you're offloading as a business. So by using an EOR, well, I think if you were going to go it alone, I think it's obvious that to keep up with the sort of international subject matter expertise and all of those different sort of back office functions is going to take up a lot of resource and time, and be quite expensive as well to sort of maintain those experts internally if that was the route you're going to go. So by using the EOR, you're kind of offloading all of that, whether it's setting up the entity, setting up the bank account, any sort of tax registration. You're also eliminating the need to sort of vet local HR or legal or payroll vendors in country, because if you are just going to go for one person, to hire one person and use an EOR, like I said, it's all packaged up within one solution. I think already, I think everyone would agree that payroll and HR is already overstretched, and to be able to have to then potentially keep on top of international hiring practices as well as your own, what you're doing locally. That's something that I'm sure a lot of payroll professionals would love to avoid. And maybe it's worth mentioning then as well, just you alluded to it, Mel, that as a business, we've realized that customers do need other sort of ancillary products or solutions on along with EOR. So we've released a lot of new solutions to our customers in response to that. So the first thing being GP Recruit. We can help our clients now with the actual talent supply piece, because sometimes that was what was holding them up. They might say, we really want to try out this market, but we actually can't find the person we need. So we've now responded to that by helping clients to find the talent as well. We've also released GP Contractor, and that means that we're not just providing an employed solution. We can help our clients to be a bit more flexible if they do just want to hire a contractor. And often they hire them as a contractor, and then after a few months decide, okay, we do want to employ this person full time. So it's a nice way to test things out and increase as you go. And then the last piece I would mention is around immigration. We're able to now provide sort of visa or work permit solutions to our clients who maybe want to hire expats. Because that was coming up a lot as well. People are just moving all over the place. And so it's great that we're able to now provide the immigration piece as a solution as well.
So I was doing some research this week about employees and, paying people, and, just because I suppose I'm a geek, just looking into it. And everything was about the Great Resignation, everything this year has been about the Great Resignation, hasn't it? And so people want to keep staff, if you've got somebody good, you want to keep them. So how does a positive onboarding experience in terms of payroll activity contribute to employee happiness and retention?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, I'm sure a lot of people will agree that payroll is very much high risk, low reward. And if it's done well, nobody really says much. It's kind of taken for granted. But if it's not done well, you'd be the first to hear about it. So I think a strong onboarding program and a strong first impression in terms of things like the payroll can really go a long way and help you to hire and retain great talent. So even some research I had looked into for this as well showed that 70% of employees are more likely to remain with an employer for 3 years or more after an excellent onboarding experience. And another study by SD Works showed that nearly half of global employee respondents would consider leaving their job if they were paid incorrectly. So as I say, it can have a really big impact if it's not done well. But like I say as well, it's sometimes it can be a thankless thing if it is done well. So I think just as an employer, it's important to recognize and not take for granted the payroll professionals in your organization, but also if it does go wrong, understand the impact that can have on your employees. As we discussed, I think some of these issues really around payroll and onboarding can creep up and be a bit more complex, especially if you're looking internationally. So all these things around worker classification, employment laws and tax filings that can all threaten the employee experience if it's not done right. And interestingly, on several occasions, just on the onboarding piece, we've actually been really great in helping to speed up hiring and onboarding for our payroll partners, where maybe they were unable to meet the go live date, because especially some of our payroll partners are very much geared towards helping large international companies with large headcounts, whereas we're quite agile because we're typically helping clients to hire a handful of people at a time. So we've been able to jump in if the payroll company cannot meet those go live dates. We can jump in and provide a temporary solution so that the payroll can be done, the person can be employed nice and quickly and compliantly. And once the go live date is available, and of course if there is an entity there, then the client simply rolls off our solution and they get employed directly into the client's entity and get their payroll then directly from the payroll partner. So I think there's lots of different ways in which an EOR can improve that onboarding process and sometimes support as a temporary solution. And I think one last piece to add around this, just because we were talking about the benefits, it's really important to understand the benefits that you should be offering from the get-go, and that's sometimes that does mean reviewing and enrolling in company benefits, which can be notoriously complicated to keep on top of, and maybe what's considered a standard benefit or sort of a statutory benefit in one location might not even exist in another. So again, using your benefits as almost like a competitive advantage, irrespective of where you're based, I think it can be really useful if you're doing it right.
Okay, so we do have some questions. There's actually a question that's come up a couple of times. So, and I know we discussed this when we met earlier on in the week. So could you provide headline differences between an employer of record and a PEO service, please?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I guess maybe just to give a wee bit of background on PEO, so Professional Employment Organization really came about because the US benefit system is quite difficult to administer as an employer. And so PEOs came about where an employer would want to payroll and provide benefits to their workers, but couldn't do it. They had to outsource it. They didn't really have a choice. And PEO is actually what we would call co-employment, because the company where the customer is doing the hiring, they do still need to have an entity, and the PEO will provide the payroll and the benefits administration in a co-employment model. So the client actually does have an entity, whereas with an EOR, an employer of record, the client does not have an entity in the location where the worker is doing the work. And so that's where GP or any EOR is 100% responsible for the employment of that individual. So it's not co-employment, it's 100% employment through us.
There's some of the questions may need to be answered after the webinar. So Jennifer, tell me if it's a bit long to answer now. Another question: do you have a presence in South African market? Do you also manage relationships with unions where applicable? And lastly, training and any other requirements?
So yes, for South African market. Unions, I'm not 100% sure on that, so let me take that one away. And what was the last one? Sorry.
Let me just go on to that.
My short-term memory is awful.
No. I was having so many questions through it, so I was trying to be all smooth.
Sorry.
With unions where applicable, and lastly, training and any other requirements. So I suppose you mentioned the recruitment. Do you do training as well?
Yeah, so to be honest, honestly, it's only where there is a legal requirement. So if there is a certain country that imposes mandatory training as part of onboarding an employee, then we will provide it. But in most cases, no. So I guess it just depends on what type of training we're talking about. But typically our clients aren't using us for training.
Okay. Actually, this other question, I haven't heard of legal representative, but I have also heard the term legal representative used. What is the difference between an EOR and a legal representative? Have you heard that phrase?
I haven't.
No.
I'm wondering, is it a bit like NRE?
So the person that's asked that question, if you do know, I haven't heard of legal representative. So okay, so we'll move on.
Let me go back, and we can, because we'll have these questions after, won't we? So we can, if you send over, I can get answers to them.
There is a request from international employees to be paid in USD. Have you seen that, and does that create complex issues? Yeah.
So presumably the workers outside of the US.
Yeah.
It's a tricky one because a lot of the time you do have to pay the employee in the local currency. So I think we'd probably need to know a wee bit more information. So if that person could get in touch, we'd absolutely be happy to advise.
Yeah, so what I can do is I'll share their information with you so that you can have a discussion. But Lisa, with our members, we do get asked this question actually quite a lot. So we can definitely come back to you on offline, because that's definitely a popular question within our forum of people wanting to be paid in different money. So David, just to let you know, I'll definitely pass your question over to Jennifer, who's just asking about the fee structure. So I'm assuming that's going to be quite a long answer, so I'll pass that to Jennifer and then she can come back to you directly. Does GP hire directly in their own legal entities, or do they subcontract in some countries or another third party?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in the majority of cases, about 95% of the employees that we hire on behalf of our clients are hired through our own entity. And that's currently about 120 entities out of 187. So we're by far have the largest coverage in terms of the industry. And so in some locations we do have to subcontract, either because it's quite tricky to set up there. Just for example, it's taken us about 4 years to set up our Nigerian entity, and we had clients that needed the service there, so we would have had to subcontract in that case. And in some locations the demand just isn't high enough to necessarily set up our own entity, because as you can imagine, 120 of our own is it's no easy feat. Yeah.
But then you've got the expertise as well, haven't you, in each individual country? So
so HR specialists in each region, speaking the local language, supporting both the employer and the employee, and legal counsel internally as well.
And also I can imagine you've got the cultural benefits as well, because that's one thing that gets sometimes forgotten, is that every country definitely has a different culture, doesn't it? And that's so important, isn't it? So you have
totally. I think sometimes as well, we get asked, is it a bit of a disadvantage because they're going through a third party? But to all intents and purposes, you shouldn't really see us. We're just making sure everything gets done correctly and compliantly. But the added benefit of that, as you kind of say, is you have a local contact who you might prefer to do your onboarding in your own language, or somebody that understands the local culture and the banking systems and things like that. So the benefit really is there that the clients and the employees have that local expertise and people on the ground in country.
And the client set the input deadline each month, or is that set by GP? And if so, what is the general cut-off date? So I'm not sure you know what the general cut-off date, but do you know if they can set their own dates?
I don't think so. I think it's standard across the board. But again, yeah, we 100% can go back and get more detail on that one for you. So great questions.
Yeah, sorry if I'm putting you on the spot here, Jennifer.
No, I'll just have some homework to do after.
If an employee does relocate to another country, can you provide sponsorship employment visas for those employees under employer of record?
So in a lot of countries we can, it just depends on the country. So there's certain countries where we can't do it. Just for example, UK and Ireland. If you imagine, especially in the UK, the worker that's being sponsored has to be carrying out the day-to-day work directly for the sponsoring entity. And because of course we're the sponsoring entity, and then the person wouldn't effectively be working for us directly, even though they're employed by us directly. Legally, we couldn't actually sponsor. So there are a few countries where it's just difficult for us to do that because of local legislation. But yes, in a nutshell, there are a lot of countries where we can provide that visa sponsorship, and a lot of our clients do use us for that work permit piece.
Okay. Somebody's asked about GPA membership. I'll come back to you on that offline.
Over to you, Mel.
Yeah, over to me, not for you, Jen. Culture is very important to us. Can we provide our company's benefits and stock when EEs are managed by employer of record?
Great question as well. So in the majority of cases, we can match what the employees are getting at HQ, especially because of that sort of benefit by employer. Just to give you an example, if you were going to hire one person in a new country, you might not be able to offer additional benefits on top of what's statutory, because you would need to have a certain headcount of employees in order to access those benefits. But because we're hiring a lot of people in each location, we can actually help you to offer better benefits to your employees. So in most cases, we can match what they're getting at HQ. In terms of shares or stock, we are currently unable to support that. What we do advise our clients to do is speak to one of our legal partners, and we can set up a side agreement alongside the employment contract to basically meet that requirement.
Okay. In which type of scenarios would an employer not need a legal entity in location? Or is this one to answer offline?
Say it again. In which scenarios would an employer not need an entity?
Yeah, in which type of scenarios would an employer not need a legal entity in location?
Oh God, there are lots. There are many. I think really where you might need an entity, it's easier to answer where you probably do need one.
Yeah.
Would be if you think you're going to be growing quite quickly, if you're going to get to quite a high headcount in a short space of time, and if those workers are going to be generating revenue, it's probably going to create a permanent establishment. So it might be a better option to set up your own entity. We are not tax experts, so I can't advise on the specifics of that, but we can certainly point you in the direction if you were looking for certain expertise. I'd say they're the key things, really. Yeah.
So there's a question about hiring people in Africa, if there's any particularly difficult locations in Africa to recruit. But I think I don't know if you know that, or if that would be a question afterwards, like to come back.
Another one. We have to go offline really for that one. Yeah. But thank
you. Okay. So I'm planning to run in-house international payroll for my remote employees. What are the challenges in doing this?
So do we know how many? Does it say how many countries or anything like that, or any kind of name any specific locations? Yeah, I think a lot of it you're going to want to consider. You're going to want to understand the employer burden in those locations. So what do you as a business have to statutorily pay for in terms of payroll taxes and the benefits that you need to offer that worker in those different locations? And as I mentioned, in some countries it could be zero. Like in some African countries, there's no social charges or employer burden, whereas in some locations it can be anywhere between 57 and 67%. We do overestimate slightly just to give clients, we'd rather give them a nice surprise instead of a nasty shock. I think that's probably the biggest factor you want to think about. The payments piece is probably going to be a bit tricky as well. Don't forget things like currency exchange rates and paying for things like that. Other complexities, I'd say they're the key things, just making sure you're providing the correct benefits and getting that pay mechanism correctly in place.
So I personally think the EOR marketplace it feels like it's exploded over the last few years. So a question we have is, where do you see the biggest opportunities are over the next 12 to 18 months?
Oh, it's a great question. I think kind of adding to what I was saying earlier around us sort of diversifying and adding on these new solutions, because EOR does touch so many different types of sort of back office functions, whether it's the tax or the immigration piece or the recruitment piece. So I think a big opportunity there is for employers of record to diversify and offer additional services, because clients do need them. In terms of using an employer of record, I think it's a great opportunity for any business to accelerate their time to growth, be more inclusive and diverse, get access to more people. Also, it can help democratize opportunity. You can now offer opportunities to countries that maybe previously would never have seen the opportunity to hire or to work as part of an exciting startup or scale up or a med tech company. There's some great opportunities out there, and now we're able to offer them into new countries where previously they wouldn't have seen those opportunities. And the talent piece as well, it's a key challenge. So being able to open up that talent pool, you're not just competing anymore with the other companies in your country or in your region, you're competing on a global scale, because most organizations now are looking globally for talent. And so you could get, one of your workers could get snapped up by somebody 5,000 miles away. I'd say they're the key things to consider.
So we're coming to, I think, one of our last questions. So if you do have any more questions, please feel free to add them to the Q&A box. But one of the things that a lot of people have been talking about, especially since the pandemic, it feels like it's sped up technology. It's moved that forward. Where do you think payroll technology is going, and do you think we'll be using more AI and more chatbots?
Yeah, absolutely. I know that that's something our clients want to see as well from us. A lot of our current tech platform is actually very automated and already using AI, but things like chatbots as well, especially for payroll providers. I think in some scenarios a lower touch solution is needed or wanted, and I think the ability to offer things like that will be a game changer for clients.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I think we're coming to an end. There are some questions about cost, and obviously we've got the other questions that we will need to go back to people. If they do want to speak to you directly, what's the best way to contact you, Jennifer?
Yeah, great question as well. So you've got my LinkedIn there, but actually, Mel, I don't know if you want to share my email address after, or
yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, so what we'll do is, as I said, if you missed the beginning, we will be sending the slides and the recording to everyone. So give us 24 hours just to get that up on the website. I will arrange for an email to be sent to everyone that has registered, and I'll make sure that I add Jennifer's contact details in. I think there are so many questions, aren't there, around EOR, and as I said, it's a growing industry. So we'll, so ask Jennifer, and I'm sure she'll get back to you. But thank you once again. It's been a really good, really informative webinar, Jennifer. And I think we've got one in September, October. So enjoy your summer. And I look forward to seeing you again in a few months.
Yeah, same to you. Thank you so much, Mel. Thank you everyone for your time. It's been great.
Thanks, everyone.